The Mysterious Tree, Fall in Olympic National Park, 2018. In the early hours of January 27th, 2018, something profoundly strange unfolded on the remote north shore of Lake Quinault in Washington's Olympic National Park. An unexplained force, still unaccounted for today, flattened over 100 mature trees, many centuries old, in a single dramatic event. These weren't just any trees. These were towering Douglas fir spruces and cedars, deeply rooted in the soil, accustomed to surviving decades of Pacific Northwest storms. Yet they were, snapped like matchsticks, many broken off near their base, and all oddly pointing in the same direction, south. What makes this phenomenon so puzzling is not just the destruction itself, but the utter lack of any reasonable explanation. Initially, it seemed like a particularly vicious windstorm had swept through the forest, but meteorologists and investigators quickly ruled that out. Weather reports from the time indicated only mild breezes, mostly easterly, with no sign of strong convection, no thunderstorms, and absolutely no high winds that would explain the semicircular devastation. Moreover, none of the nearby sensors picked up any microbursts or tornado-like activity, both of which could have potentially caused such focused damage. Bill Backus, a lead scientist at Olympic National Park, was the first to document and investigate the incident. Alarmed by the severity and strangeness of the event, he reached out to meteorologist Cliff Mass from the University of Washington, hoping that perhaps a deeper analysis of weather data might shed some light. What Mass discovered only deepened the mystery. While reviewing seismological data, he found that the force was strong enough to register a small seismic disturbance akin to a minor earthquake in the area. However, this raised more questions than answers. Earthquakes don't usually cause directional tree falls, especially not in a semicircular pattern, and there were no tectonic movements recorded that could explain such localized impact. The epicenter of the anomaly seemed to lie at the heart of the fallen trees, as though an invisible force had exploded or radiated outward with extreme power. Adding to the intrigue was the direction of the fall. All trees had toppled southward or southeastward, suggesting a force that originated in the north. But as Cliff Mass pointed out in his own weather blog, no wind activity from the north had been detected. In fact, what wind data there was pointed in the opposite direction from the southeast. It was as if the laws of physics had been temporarily suspended in that forest. Unable to find any natural cause, the scientific community found itself confronting the limits of empirical explanation. With no concrete answers, fringe theories began to proliferate. Some locals, tongue-in-cheek or not, suggested Bigfoot had something to do with it, perhaps as part of a territorial display. Others speculated about UFOs or secret government experiments gone awry. The proximity of the Olympic Peninsula to several military testing grounds and naval installations added fuel to these suspicions. Could an unseen sonic or electromagnetic weapon have been tested? Could something have crashed from the sky and been swiftly retrieved? One theory posited a rotor effect, a rare atmospheric phenomenon involving rapidly rotating air that could theoretically cause such destruction. However, the weather conditions that night were too calm for such phenomena to develop. Others turned to even more outlandish speculations involving scalar energy weapons, interdimensional disturbances, or natural anomalies yet to be understood by modern science. Despite its initial attention, the incident has largely faded from the news. Yet the fallen trees remain their broken stumps, a silent testament to whatever passed through that forest in the dead of night. No new leads, no new data, and no further incidents have occurred in the area, at least none publicly acknowledged. To this day, the Lake Quinault tree fall stands as one of the most compelling modern mysteries of nature defying conventional logic. It reminds us that for all our instruments and satellites, for all our models and simulations, nature, or perhaps something beyond it, still holds secrets capable of humbling even our most seasoned scientists. So what really happened that night in Olympic National Park? Was it a natural event we simply don't yet understand, or was it something more extraordinary? Until more evidence comes to light, we are left only with questions. A grove of toppled trees and the uncomfortable feeling that perhaps we are not always in control of the world we think we know. Sea creatures and the enigma of circular swimming. On March 18, 2021, a quietly published scientific paper in the journal iScience sent ripples through the marine biology world. The article documented a highly unusual behavior observed across multiple marine species, a strange synchronized pattern of swimming in perfect circles, often over extended periods of time. This wasn't isolated to one type of animal or region. The phenomenon was documented in green sea turtles, tiger sharks, emperor penguins, and Antarctic fur seals, all observed swimming in tight, repetitive loops, sometimes for hours at a time. The question quickly arose why the initial observation was made by Tomoko Narazaki, a researcher at the University of Tokyo's Atmosphere and Ocean Research Institute. While conducting a navigational study of green sea turtles, she moved several individuals away from their nesting sites to track how they would return. What she found was unexpected. The turtles, instead of proceeding directly to their destinations, would stop mid-journey to engage in seemingly purposeless circling, not once, not twice, but dozens of times in a row. One turtle performed 76 full revolutions each lap, taking approximately 16 to 20 seconds. What was most confounding to Narazaki was the deliberate and uniform nature of the motion. These weren't erratic turns or disoriented movements. The turtles circled with precision like machines on a loop. Given that green sea turtles are known to rely heavily on the Earth's magnetic field for long-distance navigation, Narazaki hypothesized that these loops might help the animals sample the magnetic field from multiple angles. By spinning in circles, perhaps the turtles were calibrating their internal compass for greater accuracy as they approached their nesting sites. But what began as an isolated observation in one species soon ballooned into a cross-species mystery. Researchers using the same 3D tracking technology began noticing similar behaviors in entirely different animals across various parts of the world. Tiger sharks near Hawaii were found to perform up to 272 loops in shallow waters. Emperor penguins and fur seals were also tracked, displaying this looping behavior, although the context varied, some near feeding grounds, others during courtship seasons, and still others mid-journey like the turtles. Despite these differences, the core pattern, continuous, deliberate circular motion, was consistent. This consistency baffled scientists, especially considering how inefficient the movement appeared to be. Why would an animal spend precious energy spinning in circles instead of progressing toward food, a mate, or a migration goal? Some theorists propose that circling might serve a social or mating function, particularly in species like penguins or seals. Others suspected that it could be a strategy for scanning the environment, a kind of wide-range sonar through motion, allowing the animal to detect prey predators or changes in currents. However, none of these explanations fully accounted for the breadth of the behavior across species with vastly different biological priorities and sensory systems. Narazaki's magnetic navigation theory gained traction when paired with existing knowledge about the Earth's geomagnetic landscape. It is already well established that many marine species, including turtles, whales, and even some fish, can detect and interpret Earth's magnetic fields. Some scientists speculate that circling may serve as a calibration technique, like a GPS recalibrating before a precise maneuver. By measuring the magnetic field from multiple angles, the animal might improve the accuracy of its pathfinding just before reaching a critical destination, such as a nesting beach or mating site. However, this still doesn't explain the penguins or tiger sharks, which don't share the same nesting patterns as turtles. In the case of tiger sharks, the circling was observed not just near breeding areas, but also around areas where food was abundant. This has led some researchers to theorize that the circling might relate to foraging possibly disturbing prey buried beneath the ocean floor, or testing chemical gradients in the water. But then, why would a fur seal, a largely nocturnal hunter, engage in repetitive circling during daylight hours when it isn't actively feeding? Another layer of mystery lies in the timing and distribution of these observations. While some animals circled close to the shore, others did so in deep ocean regions. Some circled during migration, others when stationary. In essence, there is no unifying environmental trigger that clearly links all the instances of this behavior. This lack of pattern has left researchers both fascinated and frustrated. The sheer novelty of the behavior has also sparked more speculative theories. Some have raised the possibility that changes in the Earth's magnetic field, such as pole shifts or field weakening, might be confusing animals and causing them to recalibrate more frequently. Others have even pointed to human interference, such as underwater cables, sonar systems, or even secret military activity disrupting animal navigation. As of now, no definitive answer has emerged. What is clear, however, is that these circular swimming patterns are not random. They are purposeful, repeated across species and geographies, and often occur at moments of high navigational importance. Whatever the cause, it opens a door into a deeper understanding of how animals interact with invisible forces like magnetism, and how little we still know about life beneath the waves. In the end, the mystery of the circling sea creatures serves as a potent reminder of the ocean's complexity. While humans have mapped the surface of the moon in greater detail than the ocean floor, we continue to discover new bewildering behaviors that challenge our assumptions about the animal kingdom. Whether the answers lie in geomagnetism, evolution, or something yet unknown, the research continues, and so do the circles. Ireland's Vanishing Triangle, the women who disappeared without a trace. In the misty heart of Eastern Ireland lies a region now forever marked by fear and mystery, an area that has become infamous as the Vanishing Triangle. Between 1993 and 1998, at least 8 young women disappeared within a roughly triangular zone stretching from Dublin in the northeast to Wexford in the southeast and across to Tullamore in the west. All vanished under eerily similar circumstances. All were walking alone in broad daylight or early evening. All were never seen again. Despite massive investigations, media coverage, and public pressure, none of the cases have ever been solved. No bodies recovered, no suspects charged, just silence, as if they had simply been swallowed by the land. The first widely recognized case was that of Annie McCarrick, a 26-year-old American student living in Dublin. On March 26, 1993, Annie set out for a day trip to the Wicklow Mountains, possibly to visit the village of Enniskerry. CCTV footage shows her withdrawing money from an ATM around 11 a.m., but after that she vanished. Her flatmates grew concerned when she failed to return home, and the Gardaí Irish police launched what would become the first in a long series of fruitless investigations. Annie's case was chilling, but perhaps it might have remained isolated. A tragic one-off had it not been for what followed. Later that same year, Eva Brennan, a 39-year-old Dubliner, disappeared after Sunday lunch with her parents. She left their home around midday for the short walk back to her flat. She never made it. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, and nothing unusual in her behavior beforehand. Gardaí were baffled. So too were her loved ones, left to wonder how someone could disappear without a trace in the middle of a bustling city. Then came Imelda Keenan in 1994, a 22-year-old student in Waterford who stepped out of her boyfriend's apartment for a quick errand and never returned. Her case was followed by Josephine Jojo Dullard, who was last heard from while trying to hitchhike home from Dublin to Kilkenny in 1995. Jojo had called a friend from a payphone to say she was on her way. That was the last anyone heard from her. Her story, perhaps more than any other, would come to epitomize the terror and helplessness families of the missing felt. A cheerful, trusting young woman who seemed to vanish into the dark without leaving even a footprint. By the time Ciara Breen, 1997, Fiona Pender, 1996, Deirdre Jacob, 1998, and Ciara Breen again listed likely a duplication in press narratives were reported missing, a pattern had begun to take shape, one that couldn't be ignored. All of the victims were women between the ages of 17 and 39. All vanished without witnesses or apparent motive. None had histories of running away or mental illness. Most were last seen near roads or public areas. Many lived independently or were on the move, students, professionals, or in transitional life stages. And all were within the loose confines of the same general geographical area, forming a triangle on the map that soon captured public imagination and dread. Journalists began referring to the area as Ireland's Vanishing Triangle, a phrase that evoked both the Bermuda Triangle and Ireland's own rich mythological landscape where fairies, banshees, and spirits of the land were once blamed for strange happenings. But this was no myth. These were real women with families and futures who were seemingly plucked from the earth without explanation. As the disappearances piled up, the Gardaí faced mounting criticism. Families accused investigators of being slow to act, dismissive or ill-equipped to handle what they believed to be the work of a serial predator. Some cases were initially misclassified as missing persons rather than potential abductions. Others saw leads go unpursued. A lack of centralized databases and coordination across police districts only added to the confusion. Many criminologists have since argued that the most likely explanation is the work of one or more serial killers operating within the region. The similarities in victim profile, disappearance style, and geographic overlap strongly suggest a predatory pattern. Yet no definitive link between any of the cases has ever been proven. DNA evidence is scarce or non-existent. Witnesses are few, if any. Some have speculated that the perpetrator may have worked in construction, transportation, or delivery. A person familiar with the roads, able to move freely and dispose of evidence without raising suspicion. Others have floated more conspiratorial or supernatural explanations. Ireland has a long tradition of stories involving people who vanish into the woods, the hills, or even fairy realms, an older cultural framework for dealing with the inexplicable. While few modern commentators take these literally, the eerie, fog-shrouded beauty of the region combined with the sheer absence of answers has kept such folklore alive in the public imagination. To this day, the Vanishing Triangle remains a source of national anguish in Ireland. The families of the missing women continue to seek answers, clinging to hope, however fragile that new technology. New witnesses or renewed public attention might finally bring resolution. In recent years, cold case units have reopened some of the investigations. Advanced forensic techniques such as LiDAR scanning and DNA profiling have been applied to old evidence with limited but promising results. In 2023, one case, that of Deirdre Jacob, was upgraded to a murder inquiry, with a known sex offender declared a person of interest, but still no charges. What happened to these women? Were they taken by one man or several? Did someone use Ireland's rural backroads and thick woodlands to conceal unspeakable crimes? Or is the answer even darker, a system that failed to protect them, a society too slow to see the pattern, and a truth buried in the silent places of the land? Until the day one of the missing is found, until a confession is made or a body recovered, Ireland's Vanishing Triangle will remain one of Europe's most haunting unsolved mysteries. A chilling testament to how someone can disappear in plain sight and how absence can echo louder than presence ever did. The Grand Canyon disappearance of Adam Clayton, Lyle Jones, 2011. The Grand Canyon, a breathtaking natural wonder carved by time and water, is often associated with awe, adventure, and spiritual reflection. Yet behind its immense beauty lies a harsh, unyielding wilderness, one that has claimed many lives and hidden countless secrets. One such secret is the baffling disappearance of Adam Clayton, Lyle Jones, a 23-year-old man from Oregon, who vanished within the Grand Canyon National Park in 2011, leaving behind more questions than answers. Adam was an experienced hiker and nature enthusiast who set out on a solo journey to the Grand Canyon in early March 2011. According to park records, he entered the South Rim area with the intention of backpacking through remote inner canyon trails. He was young, healthy, and reportedly well prepared for the journey, a man who had been described by family and friends as calm, centered, and introspective. He had no known mental health issues, no financial troubles, and no history of running away or seeking isolation beyond what a nature getaway might offer. The last confirmed sighting of Adam came from a park ranger who spoke with him briefly at a backcountry permit office. Adam had asked about less traveled routes and was particularly curious about paths that led to spiritual landmarks, such as ancient Hopi sites and caves considered sacred by Native Americans. He was carrying a sturdy backpack, several days' worth of supplies, and a journal in which he had been recording thoughts about life consciousness and the metaphysical nature of reality. The ranger noted that while Adam seemed unusually reflective, he showed no signs of distress. But after that conversation, Adam vanished. He never checked in again, never emerged from the canyon, and no communication came from him thereafter. When he failed to return by his expected date, His family reported him missing, triggering one of the largest search and rescue operations the park had conducted in recent years. Over 45 people, including helicopters, search dogs, and thermal imaging, were deployed across rugged terrain spanning hundreds of miles of trails, ridges, and valleys. But despite days of searching, there was no trace, no clothing, no gear, no journal, not even footprints beyond a certain point. His last known location was somewhere near Horseshoe Mesa, a challenging and remote area accessible only to seasoned hikers. Searchers found a small rock cairn nearby, which some believed he might have built as a marker, but beyond that, the trail went cold. What made Adam's case especially eerie was not just the lack of evidence, but the spiritual overtones surrounding his disappearance. His journal, a photocopied portion recovered later by family from his home, revealed entries contemplating death, ego dissolution, alternate dimensions, and the idea that certain places on Earth acted as veils between worlds. In one passage he wrote, "The canyon isn't just rock and river, it's a mirror, a portal, a place to lose the self and maybe find something else." While poetic, these entries raised questions. Was Adam seeking some kind of transcendental experience? Did he believe he could access a higher state of consciousness, or even another plane of existence within the canyon's ancient wall? If so, did this quest lead him to danger, perhaps entering a cave system, becoming trapped, or encountering a physical hazard hidden from rescuers? The Grand Canyon is riddled with unmarked trails, steep drop-offs, and concealed caves, many of which are off-limits to the public due to instability or sacred tribal significance. Over the years, there have been rumors, often fueled by conspiracy forums, of people encountering strange lights, electromagnetic anomalies, and sudden emotional shifts while exploring remote parts of the canyon. Some even claim the government has cordoned off specific areas due to unusual findings, including remnants of non-indigenous structures, deep cave networks, and radiation zones. While such claims lack concrete evidence, they have gained traction in fringe circles, especially in connection with cases like Adam's. Some believe he may have stumbled upon something forbidden or secret and paid the price. Others suggest more mystical theories, that he intentionally crossed over in a spiritual act of disappearance, or that he encountered a dimensional rift, an ancient Native American myth come alive. These ideas, while speculative, reflect a deep human need to explain what seems impossible to accept, that a person could vanish so thoroughly without a trace. There are, of course, more rational explanations. The Grand Canyon's terrain is extremely dangerous even for skilled hikers. A simple misstep on a narrow trail heat stroke, a hidden crevice, or a rock slide could lead to death and complete concealment. Vultures and wild animals can scatter remains rapidly, but even in such cases, some evidence is usually found. A shoe, a torn bag, a water bottle, something. The absence of even a single item is what sets Adam's disappearance apart from more common backcountry tragedies. The National Park Service officially lists him as missing, presumed dead. Yet his case remains open, and his family has never stopped searching. His mother has given interviews in which she says she believes Adam went looking for something larger than life, and maybe he found it. She doesn't believe he would have taken his own life or gotten lost through recklessness. To her, his disappearance felt intentional, or at least otherworldly. Each year, a few hikers go missing in the Grand Canyon and other vast parks across the American West. Some are eventually found alive or deceased, but others, like Adam Clayton, Lyle Jones, leave behind only questions, and a haunting sense that the land itself holds secrets too deep, too old and too sacred to be uncovered by conventional means. As the sun sets over the layered cliffs and shadowed depths of the canyon, one cannot help but wonder what happened to Adam. Did he fall? Did he flee? Or did he, as some believe, cross a threshold not meant for ordinary men? The Vanishing Triangle and the disappearances in Vermont, tucked within the lush forested mountains of southwestern Vermont, lies a region known as the Vanishing Triangle, an eerie and mysterious zone centered around Glastonbury Mountain, a place long associated with strange disappearances, Native American legends, and a pervasive sense of unease. Though not as famous as the Bermuda Triangle, this region has drawn attention from folklorists, historians, and paranormal investigators alike, due to a troubling pattern of people vanishing without a trace between 1945 and 1950. And some say the area's dark energy has never really dissipated. The name Vanishing Triangle was coined by author and folklorist Joseph A. Citro, who popularized the area's Unsolved Mysteries. According to his research and other historical accounts, a cluster of mysterious disappearances occurred within a 10-mile radius of Glastonbury Mountain, an area that was once home to small logging towns before becoming completely abandoned by the late 19th century. The mountain itself had long been regarded by local Native American tribes as cursed or spiritually dangerous. The Abenaki, in particular, avoided the mountain, believing it to be the domain of powerful, malevolent spirits, and describing the land as wrong, a place where the wilderness itself rejected human intrusion. The most famous disappearances within the Vanishing Triangle began in 1945, starting with Mitty Rivers, a 74-year-old local hunting guide. He was leading a group of 4 hunters through the mountains and was walking ahead of them when he disappeared from the trail. The group expected to see him at the next stop, but he never arrived. Despite an extensive search, all that was found was a single rifle cartridge in a stream bed believed to have fallen from his pocket. Mitty, a seasoned woodsman, vanished in broad daylight without a sound or sign. Then came the baffling disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon, an 18-year-old Bennington College student just 1 year later in 1946. She had gone for a solo hike on the Long Trail, a popular route that winds through the forested highlands. Multiple witnesses saw her walking toward the trailhead, and one man even claimed to have given her directions. She was dressed lightly despite the winter weather, but showed no signs of distress. Paula was never seen again. A massive search was launched, involving police volunteers, bloodhounds, and even the FBI, all to no avail. Her disappearance garnered national headlines, yet not a single clue was ever uncovered. The year 1949 saw the vanishing of James E. Tetford, a veteran who lived in the Bennington Soldiers' Home. Tetford had been visiting relatives and was returning by bus. He was seen boarding, and several passengers confirmed that he was present during the ride. Yet by the time the bus reached its destination, Tetford was gone. His luggage still in the overhead compartment, his seat empty, as if he had dissolved into thin air. No one had seen him exit, and there were no stops where he could have slipped away unnoticed. This case in particular led some to speculate about temporal rifts or interdimensional anomalies. The most chilling case, however, may be that of Paul Jepson, an 8-year-old boy who disappeared in 1950 while playing near his family's farm truck. His mother, who had only stepped away, briefly returned to find him missing. A search was launched immediately. Bloodhounds tracked his scent to a crossroads eerily close to where Paula Weldon had vanished, and then the trail abruptly ended. His red jacket should have made him easy to spot in the dense woods, yet nothing was ever found. Even stranger, Paul had expressed a strong desire to visit the mountains in the days leading up to his disappearance, almost as if he were drawn to them. Just 16 days after Paul vanished, Frida Langer, an experienced hiker and outdoors woman, disappeared during a short hike with her cousin near the Somerset Reservoir. She slipped and fell into a shallow stream, returned to the campsite to change clothes, and then simply never came back. What makes her case different is that her body was eventually found, but only 7 months later in an area that had been searched multiple times. The cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition. This discovery only deepened the mystery, as it suggested something or someone may have moved her body, or that her remains had been hidden in some inaccessible space before being returned. Skeptics argue that these disappearances, while tragic, could be explained by natural hazards, wild animals, hypothermia, getting lost in dense woods. But others see a pattern too strange to ignore. The overlapping geographic area, the lack of evidence in most cases, the suddenness of each disappearance, these are not hallmarks of ordinary wilderness accidents. Add to that the Native American warnings about the land, and the stories take on a deeply unsettling tone. Some researchers have proposed that the Vanishing Triangle may be a window area, a term used in paranormal theory to describe places where the boundaries between dimensions are thin or unstable. These are areas where people report time slips, mysterious sounds, disorientation, and feelings of being watched. Glastonbury Mountain fits this description perfectly. Hikers report sudden, unexplained silences in the forest bizarre compass readings and an overwhelming sensation of dread in certain spots. Others have floated more esoteric theories, vortexes, alien abduction, or that the mountain acts as a kind of ancient sentient force that resists human presence. The terrain is rugged and confusing, with trails that seem to shift old paths that lead nowhere, and a thick canopy that blocks the sun, disorienting even for seasoned outdoors people. Whatever the cause, the Vanishing Triangle has remained mostly untouched by modern development. The mountain is considered ghost land, both metaphorically and literally, and remains one of Vermont's most persistently mysterious places. The disappearances have slowed, but hikers still report strange phenomena, and locals still speak of the triangle in hushed tones, as if acknowledging that some places were never meant to be fully understood. The strange case of the disappearing Malaysian jungle tribe. Deep within the lush rainforests of Malaysia, a baffling and haunting case has stirred speculation among anthropologists, spiritualists, and skeptics alike. The unexplained disappearance of an entire indigenous tribe, the Penan, from an area they had long inhabited. While scattered reports of nomadic tribes moving deeper into the jungle aren't uncommon, what occurred in early 2004 stands apart for its scale suddenness and the lingering questions that still surround it. This was not simply a case of migration or flight from danger. This was a vanishing that defied all conventional explanation. The Penan people are one of the last remaining nomadic hunter-gatherer groups in Southeast Asia. Known for their deep spiritual connection to the forest, they practice a sustainable lifestyle based on foraging, hunting with blowpipes, and respecting the balance of nature. Many Pinan have over the decades been relocated or assimilated into broader Malaysian society due to deforestation and political pressure. But some groups have remained defiant, continuing their traditional way of life in remote jungle regions. It was one such isolated community, believed to number around 35 to 40 individuals, that vanished without trace in Sarawak, Borneo. This particular group was known to local logging companies, NGOs, and a few anthropologists who had been monitoring the tribe's well-being. In early 2004, reports from nearby loggers and aid workers indicated that the tribe had simply disappeared from their settlement area. Their huts made of rattan and bamboo were left intact. Food supplies were untouched. Tools were found lying on the ground as if dropped mid-task. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of illness, and no tracks leading away from the area. For a tribe deeply attuned to the land, leaving no footprints was highly unusual. Alarmed local authorities and volunteer search teams combed the area, expanding their search radius to account for a potential retreat deeper into the jungle. Helicopters flew overhead, and traditional trackers attempted to follow faint trails, but all efforts failed. The forest, it seemed, had swallowed them whole. Their trail vanished within a few miles as if they had simply dematerialized. No neighboring tribes reported sightings, no camps were found. It was as though the entire group had been erased. Several theories quickly emerged. One was that the Pinan group had deliberately gone into hiding to escape further encroachment from logging companies. This was not entirely out of character. Historically, some tribes have resisted modernization and intrusion by disappearing deeper into uncharted forest. However, in this case, the signs pointed against such a move. For one, the group had not been in conflict with any outside party at the time. Second, they had left behind important tools, food, and ceremonial objects. Things no Pinan would abandon unless fleeing sudden danger. This led to the second theory, an environmental or health-related catastrophe. Could a rapid illness have taken the group before they could seek help? Could a flash flood or landslide have swept them away? Yet no such events were recorded in the region at that time. Furthermore, no bodies, clothing, or debris were ever found. Malaysian authorities, though initially cautious, quietly closed the case, categorizing it as a voluntary retreat, a verdict that failed to convince the anthropologists familiar with Pinan traditions. Others turned to darker explanations. The jungle in Borneo is a place of mystery and myth. Local Dayak folklore speaks of spirit forests, enchanted areas where the veil between the human world and the spirit world grows thin. It's believed that trespassing into such places without proper respect or ceremony can result in being taken by forest spirits. While to Western minds this may sound like superstition, these beliefs are deeply rooted in the spiritual cosmology of indigenous communities across Southeast Asia. The forest is not merely geography. It is alive, aware, and at times temperamental. Some tribes speak of orang bunian supernatural beings or forest-dwelling spirits that resemble humans but live in a parallel world. According to these traditions, humans who offend the forest may be spirited away into this unseen realm, sometimes permanently. Could it be that something sacred had been disturbed? Had this group trespassed unknowingly upon forbidden land? Interestingly, shortly after the disappearance, some nearby indigenous groups reported strange happenings, whispering sounds in the jungle at night, unfamiliar animal calls, and ghostly sightings. Some claim to have heard singing deep in the forest songs, sung in dialects that had not been heard for generations. While such claims are of course anecdotal and unverifiable, they paint a chilling picture of a community swallowed not by disaster, but perhaps by something otherworldly. Even modern researchers admit to an unsettling truth: the deeper one ventures into Borneo's dense jungles, the more reality begins to warp. Compass needles spin unpredictably. GPS devices fail. People report sudden, inexplicable disorientation, as though the forest rearranges itself while one isn't looking. The indigenous peoples are well aware of these strange properties and often perform rituals before entering certain zones, a fact that many outsiders ignore, sometimes to their peril. There is also the unsettling lack of closure. Over 2 decades have passed, and no trace of this tribe has ever surfaced. Not a single member has reappeared in any village or settlement. No bodies have been recovered, and none of the few known Pennon elders from other regions have heard from the vanished group again. In the years since, researchers visiting the same region report an uneasy stillness, as if the forest is watching. Locals still refer to the area as cursed. Perhaps what makes this case so disturbing is not only the mystery itself, but the idea it represents that in our technologically saturated world, entire groups of people can still vanish, not into some digital abyss, but into the wild, into the primordial unknown. That there are still places on Earth where our maps are useless, our logic insufficient, and our understanding shallow. Whether the tribe vanished due to natural causes, purposeful disappearance, or something more mystical, their absence serves as a chilling reminder the forest keeps its secrets. And not all who enter will be remembered. The Disappearance of Frederick Valentich, 1978. On the evening of October 21, 1978, a 20-year-old Australian pilot named Frederick Valentich climbed into a rented Cessna 182L light aircraft and took off from Moorabbin Airport in Victoria. His stated destination was King Island, a remote speck of land in the Bass Strait, situated between mainland Australia and Tasmania. The flight was supposed to be routine, just under 250 kilometers, and well within Valentich's experience. But what happened that evening has since become one of the most baffling aviation mysteries of the 20th century, filled with eerie transmissions, a missing aircraft, and speculation that ranges from the plausible to the otherworldly. Frederick Valentich was an enthusiastic flyer. He had logged around 150 hours of flight time, not an enormous amount, but enough to pilot a small aircraft solo. Friends and family described him as intelligent, deeply interested in aviation, and most notably fascinated with UFOs. He often spoke of extraterrestrial craft, read books on the subject, and speculated on government cover-ups. Some considered him eccentric, others simply curious. Either way, his passion for flying and for the unexplained would soon collide in a case that remains officially unresolved. Valentich departed Moorabbin at 6:19 p.m. The weather was calm. He was in contact with Melbourne Air Traffic Control ATC and progressing as planned. But at 7:06 p.m. things took a dramatic turn. Valentich radioed ATC with a troubling message. He was being followed by a large aircraft, one that appeared to be hovering above him, not flying in any conventional way. What follows is a haunting radio exchange recorded and later released to the public. Valentich described the unidentified craft as having 4 bright lights, long in shape, metallic, and moving at incredible speed. "It's not an aircraft," he insisted. When asked to identify it further, he seemed increasingly agitated. At one point, he reported that the craft was orbiting above his Cessna. He also claimed that his engine was rough idling and that he was experiencing mechanical problems. Moments later, at 7:12 p.m., his final words were transmitted. "That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." Then, radio silence. The transmission ended with a series of strange metallic scraping or clanging sounds which have never been definitively explained. Despite an immediate search, neither Valentich nor his plane were ever found. No wreckage, no body, nothing. The Australian government launched an official investigation but concluded with a frustratingly vague result. The reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined. In other words, they didn't know. Speculation, however, exploded. Given Valentich's repeated references to a mysterious aircraft and his known interest in UFOs, many jumped to the extraterrestrial explanation. Could he have been abducted by aliens? Was the strange craft some kind of advanced aerial vehicle beyond human technology? Ufologists latched onto the case as compelling proof of alien contact. The combination of audio recordings, eyewitness credibility, and the total lack of physical evidence made for the perfect storm of conspiracy. But others were more skeptical. Some theorized that Valentich had become disoriented, possibly inverted, and was seeing his own aircraft's lights reflected in the water below. Perhaps he had entered a graveyard spiral, a condition in which a pilot unaware of gradual banking loses altitude in a circular descent until impact. Under this theory, the strange lights and movements he described were optical illusions caused by disorientation. However, even this explanation leaves gaps. Why didn't radar detect a crash? Why was there no wreckage found along the route or in the water? Why the bizarre scraping noises in his final transmission? And what of the multiple independent reports from people near the Bass Strait that same evening who claimed to have seen strange green lights or disc-shaped objects in the sky? In fact, over 20 witnesses later came forward saying they saw a strange green light in the area where Valentich disappeared. Some claimed they saw a large object moving erratically above a small aircraft. These accounts were largely dismissed or under-investigated, but they remain part of the public record and continue to fuel belief that Valentich encountered something far beyond conventional explanation. One of the eeriest elements of the case lies in its alignment with a long history of strange occurrences over the Bass Strait. The region has long been referred to as Australia's Bermuda Triangle due to its record of shipwrecks, plane disappearances, and reported UFO activity. The strait's turbulent waters, unusual magnetic anomalies, and meteorological quirks have given rise to centuries of legends and superstitions, many of which gained renewed attention after Valentich's disappearance. In 2014, more than 3 decades after the event, the Australian government finally released its full investigative file, but no new clues were found. Some skeptics still cling to pilot error, while others believe the truth lies not in human failure, but in cosmic interference. For Frederick Valentich's family, the pain never healed. His father, Guido Valentich, maintained for years that his son had been taken by an extraterrestrial craft and might still be alive somewhere beyond Earth. The fact that they have never found wreckage, he said in interviews, supports the idea of an alien encounter. To this day, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains one of the most thoroughly documented, yet utterly unexplainable aviation incidents in history. It leaves us with a chilling possibility that in our skies, even in routine flights and everyday paths, There may be unknowns watching us, studying us, perhaps even intervening. Whether skeptics accept it or not, the tape of Valentich's last words exists. So does the void he left behind. A young pilot vanished into a calm evening sky, chasing a dream and perhaps encountering something that dreams or nightmares are made of. The Green Fireballs over New Mexico. 1948-1950. Between 1948 and 1950, the skies over New Mexico became a theater for one of the most perplexing and unexplained aerial phenomena in American history. A wave of eerie green fireballs that streaked across the night sky, silent and swift, behaving in ways no known meteor or man-made object ever had. These weren't isolated sightings by startled civilians. They were observed repeatedly by military personnel, pilots, scientists, and government officials. The fireballs appeared with enough regularity and precision to provoke an official government investigation, and even today, over 70 years later, no consensus has been reached about what they were. The first major sightings occurred in late 1948, particularly around Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratory's facilities at the heart of America's top-secret nuclear research. Witnesses described the objects as bright green glowing orbs that traveled at high speeds in level trajectories, often making sharp turns or hovering briefly before vanishing. Unlike meteors, which typically follow downward arc-shaped paths and burn up quickly in the atmosphere, these fireballs behaved with what appeared to be intelligent control. They were far too slow to be natural meteors, yet far too fast and agile for known aircraft technology of the time. One of the most compelling early accounts came from Dr. Lincoln La Paz, a renowned astronomer and government consultant on atmospheric phenomena. La Paz had extensive experience tracking meteor paths and identifying natural celestial events. But the green fireballs, he said, were unlike anything he had ever seen. He personally witnessed several incidents, meticulously calculated their trajectories, and concluded that these were not meteors. His reports emphasized the low-altitude controlled flight patterns of the objects and their consistent green hue, a color rarely associated with natural fireballs. La Paz wasn't the only one taking the incident seriously. The U.S. military was alarmed. The fact that the green fireballs were clustered around sensitive atomic installations led to fears of Soviet espionage or surveillance. The Cold War was escalating, and nuclear secrets were a matter of existential concern. In response, the U.S. Air Force, in cooperation with the Atomic Energy Commission and Project Sign, a precursor to Project Blue Book, launched an investigation known as Project Twinkle in 1949. Project Twinkle's goal was to establish observation posts near hotspot locations and gather data. However, the results were inconclusive. Despite multiple sightings, photographic evidence remained elusive, and no definitive explanation could be reached. Internal memos reflect deep frustration and deep concern. One Air Force document described the fireballs as a serious threat to the security of the United States, not because they were confirmed enemy craft, but because no one could identify them. Adding to the mystery was the sheer consistency of the sightings. Trained observers, including pilots and radar operators, reported identical descriptions, green glowing spheres, traveling at incredible speeds, often silently, and sometimes appearing to follow aircraft or descend with purpose. On several occasions, attempts were made to intercept or track the objects, but they either vanished or outmaneuvered pursuit. The green color itself became a focal point of analysis. While green fireballs can occur in meteorite cases, typically due to nickel and copper content, Their behavior remains wildly different from what was reported. The fireballs over New Mexico didn't arc downward and disintegrate. They stayed aloft. They moved horizontally. Some even reportedly stopped in midair before changing direction. Was it mass hysteria, optical illusions, misidentifications? Skeptics proposed various theories, including test aircraft, unusual weather phenomena, or reflections of light on inversion layers in the atmosphere. But none of these theories could explain the full scope of the phenomena, especially not to the satisfaction of La Paz and other professional observers. One particularly chilling theory suggested the fireballs were Soviet reconnaissance drones or advanced aerial vehicles launched from submarines off the U.S. coast. But in the late 1940s, such a capability would have been technologically astounding and still doesn't account for the green glow or erratic movement patterns. Moreover, no Soviet technology of the era, even decades later, has matched the characteristics described. As the 1950s unfolded, the green fireballs seemed to taper off, but their legacy endured. They became one of the first cases in U.S. history where the government publicly acknowledged an unidentified aerial phenomenon and launched a formal scientific investigation. The phenomenon also helped shape the culture of secrecy and skepticism that would define UFO studies in the Cold War era. To this day, many researchers believe the green fireballs were an early, perhaps unintentional display of intelligence not from this world, or alternately, a glimpse at classified American or foreign technology far ahead of its time. Others see the incident as a sobering reminder of how little we truly understand about our own skies. Modern-day ufologists often cite the New Mexico fireballs as one of the most credible and under-discussed mass aerial anomalies in history. Unlike most UFO sightings, this wasn't one person seeing something strange in the sky. It was repeated over a stretch of time, documented by military personnel, scientists, and top-level investigators. Despite the declassification of many government documents related to the case, the core mystery remains. No wreckage, no captured craft, no definitive photo. Just glowing green orbs moving with intelligence and silence. The green fireballs continue to haunt the minds of those who study the unknown, offering a chilling yet mesmerizing question: what flew above New Mexico's nuclear secrets? And perhaps more importantly, why were they watching us? The Vanishing Village of Angikuni Lake, 1930. Among the most chilling and enigmatic tales to ever emerge from the snowy reaches of the Canadian Arctic is the alleged disappearance of an entire Inuit village near Angikuni Lake in 1930. A remote and serene body of water nestled in the Kivalik region of present-day Nunavut Angikuni was home to a tight-knit community of Inuit who lived in harmony with the land, seasonally trapping, fishing, and hunting in an environment as beautiful as it was unforgiving. What allegedly transpired there has haunted investigators, researchers, and skeptics for nearly a century. According to the most widely circulated account, an entire village of men, women, and children simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind meals, dogs, supplies, and even graves that appeared to have been dug up and emptied. While some scholars dispute the story's accuracy, others believe it may contain a kernel of terrifying truth lost to time and myth. The most prominent version of the tale originates with a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle, who had frequented the area for years. One bitterly cold November day in 1930, LaBelle reportedly made his routine journey to the lakeside Inuit settlement, where he was always welcomed warmly. But this time, as he approached the village, an unsettling stillness greeted him. The usual signs of life, cooking fires, barking sled dogs, children's laughter were absent. The village, comprised of several dwellings, was eerily silent. LaBelle investigated further and found the homes abandoned, yet strangely intact. Furs were still laid out, meals half-prepared, and belongings undisturbed. In one hut, he found a pot of charred stew still hanging over dead embers, as if the cook had vanished mid-meal. Most chillingly, the sled dogs had reportedly starved to death, tied to posts, and left without care, an unspeakable taboo in a culture where the animals were vital to survival and deeply respected. Struck by panic, LaBelle fled the village and trekked dozens of miles through snow and forest to reach the nearest telegraph station, where he reported the mass disappearance to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP. According to some accounts, when officers arrived, they confirmed the village was deserted and bore signs of hasty abandonment. But what they found next only deepened the mystery. Several graves were open, their contents missing. Some reports claimed the tombs had been excavated from within, not dug into, but torn open as though something had erupted outward. Others described strange tracks in the snow that led nowhere, and some even claimed to have seen bizarre lights in the sky around the time of the disappearance, flickering blue-green orbs moving against the Arctic stars. These extraordinary details fueled the notion that the villagers were either abducted, annihilated, or had fled in terror from something unimaginable. Naturally, theories began to proliferate. Some believed the villagers were victims of mass migration due to impending starvation or threats from other groups, though no traces of such an exodus were ever found. Others speculated about paranormal causes, from ancient spirits of the tundra to alien intervention. More skeptical voices have questioned whether the incident ever occurred at all. Investigative journalist Frank Edwards popularized the story in the 1950s in his book Stranger Than Science, but he offered few verifiable sources. The RCMP, for its part, eventually released a statement denying that such a disappearance had ever been reported, labeling the story as urban legend or sensationalized fiction. Yet others argue that this official response came decades after the fact and may have been a form of damage control. In remote, sparsely populated areas like Nunavut in the 1930s, record-keeping was inconsistent and communications were often delayed or incomplete. It's not inconceivable that a real incident, perhaps not as dramatic as described, could have occurred and been obscured over time by retellings, cultural misunderstandings, or willful suppression. One possibility lies in the oral traditions of the Inuit themselves. Indigenous stories passed down through generations often speak of malignant spirits, sky people, or supernatural beings capable of taking entire groups in the night. While such tales may be metaphorical, they reflect a worldview attuned to phenomena we might label paranormal or inexplicable. For those who believe in hidden forces beyond the physical world, the fate of the Angakuni villagers aligns with accounts of spiritual disruption or cosmic abduction. There's also a psychological dimension to the tale, the way extreme isolation, harsh environments, and the unknown terrain of the Arctic stir the human mind. For settlers and explorers unfamiliar with the indigenous culture or landscape, the village that moved with the seasons could be mistaken as abandoned. Graves disturbed by animals might be interpreted as desecrated. Dogs left behind might point not to catastrophe, but to the painful choices made during migration. But if the Anjikuni mystery is purely myth, why does it persist with such eerie tenacity? Part of the answer lies in the profound fear of vanishing, especially in a place as remote and desolate as the Arctic. The idea that dozens of people with no motive to flee and no means to disappear without trace could simply be erased from existence defies our sense of logic and control. It calls into question our assumptions about safety, permanence, and even reality itself. In today's world, where satellites track every movement and cell towers connect even the most isolated communities, the story of Anjikuni feels like a ghost of a bygone era, a time when the Earth still held deep secrets and when whole communities could slide into the unknown without a whisper. But it's also a reminder that even now there are blank spots on the map, both literal and psychological, where our understanding falters and myth takes root. Whether the vanishing village of Anjikuni Lake was fact fiction or something in between, its story endures as one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the North, a cautionary tale about the limits of knowledge and the power of fear in the face of the inexplicable. The Devil's Footprints in Devon, England. 1850. On a cold winter morning in February 1855, the residents of Devonshire, England, awoke to a scene that would embed itself deeply into the annals of supernatural folklore, a trail of mysterious, hoof-like footprints stretching for miles across the snow-covered countryside. What alarmed the villagers most wasn't just the peculiar shape of the tracks, but how far they extended what they traversed, and the unnerving implication of their presence. These weren't merely prints in the snow. To many, they were the mark of something unearthly, possibly even demonic. The phenomenon spanned across nearly 40 towns and villages, with eyewitnesses from Exmouth to Topsham to Dawlish and even as far inland as Totnes. All told, reports suggested the tracks extended for over 100 miles, an almost inconceivable distance for any one creature to have traveled, especially in a single night, across snow. What gave the event its name, the Devil's Footprints, was the eerie uniformity and shape of the prints. Each one measured about 4 inches long, 4 inches, across, spaced roughly 8 to 16 inches apart, and bore a cloven hoof appearance. The resemblance to a goat's or donkey's print was unmistakable, except that these tracks did not behave like any animals. The prints were uncannily linear, as though whatever made them had walked on 2 legs rather than 4. More disturbing still, they crossed rooftops, scaled walls, entered and exited enclosed gardens, and even appeared on narrow parapets and in drain pipes as small as 4 inches in diameter. One witness described them as going straight over 15-foot-high haystacks and then continuing at the other side without interruption. Others found them leading directly into houses and exiting on the far side without any sign of the door or window being opened. The British newspapers quickly caught on to the spectacle. The Illustrated London News and the Times published accounts from baffled locals and theories from naturalists and clergy alike. Despite the scrutiny, no one could present a satisfactory explanation. Weather conditions had been cold but calm. No heavy wind, no melting or refreezing of snow that might alter natural tracks. The marks were fresh, crisp, and unmistakably intentional, whatever that may mean. People offered explanations ranging from escaped kangaroos, a few were housed in private menageries at the time, to badgers, donkeys, mice hopping in snow, and balloon-carried mechanisms dragging something across the ground. But none of these suggestions accounted for the sheer consistency, terrain coverage, or aerial feats the tracks seemed to accomplish. the most unsettling theory, was theological. Cloven hoofs are classically associated with Satan, and the footprint pattern resembled this archetypal image. For deeply religious Victorians, particularly in rural parishes where Christian imagery of hellfire and demons was vivid, this was not a metaphor. Some believed the devil himself had walked across Devon that night, marking his presence for reasons unknown. Local priests warned parishioners to stay indoors after dark and to cleanse their homes with prayer. Some even initiated group blessings of entire villages. Livestock were reported to fall ill in the weeks following the event, and a handful of suicides and mental breakdowns were retrospectively connected to the fear the incident provoked. However, skepticism was not absent. A few naturalists maintained that badgers or rats might explain the trail moving in ways that only appeared to be two-legged and linear. Some posited that unusual melting patterns of ice crystals might have distorted mundane animal tracks. But such explanations could not fully address the prints on rooftops or across 10-foot-high barriers. In time, the event faded from mainstream memory, but it has never been completely forgotten. The Devonshire phenomenon has since become a staple in books of unsolved mysteries, Fortean events, and paranormal lore. Modern researchers who revisit the accounts are often left with more questions than answers. The bizarre consistency of the footprints, their geographical reach, and the lack of any known creature to match the behavior still baffles contemporary analysts. In a modern world, dominated by surveillance satellites and sensors, it's hard to imagine such a mystery happening today without clear evidence, photographs, video GPS traces. But in 1855, all we had were eyewitness accounts, sketches, and fading footprints in the snow, fleeting proof of an event that still defies explanation. Even more curious is that similar events have been reported elsewhere in history, though never to the same scale. In Germany, Scotland, and even parts of the United States, there have been scattered accounts of mysterious single-file hoofprints appearing in isolated winter conditions. But none matched the sheer scale or psychological impact of what occurred in Devon that February night. So what could have left those prints? Was it a bizarre, natural phenomenon, an unseen hoax, or something more ominous, a visitation from an entity beyond human comprehension? Could it have been an experiment, gone wrong, a secret technology, or the work of a solitary madman seeking to imprint a myth upon the land? In a strange way, the devil's footprints serve as a kind of Rorschach test for belief. Some see it as proof of the supernatural, others as an unsolved natural puzzle, and still others as an elaborate early example of social hysteria. Yet no matter the lens through which it is viewed, it remains one of the most enigmatic winter mysteries ever recorded. To this day, the snow in Devon has never been walked the same. The missing Sodder children. 1945. On Christmas Eve of 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a fire broke out at the home of George and Jenny Sodder. Within 45 minutes, their house was reduced to ash. But the real horror wasn't the fire. It was the haunting absence of 5 of the Sodder children, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5. Their bodies were never recovered. To this day, their disappearance remains one of the most perplexing and emotionally charged unsolved mysteries in American history. The story begins earlier that evening. The Sodders, a large family of 10 children, had celebrated a festive holiday together. At around 10 p.m., The children, who were still awake, asked their mother if they could stay up and play with their new toys. Jenny allowed it, and she went to bed while her husband George and their two oldest sons were already asleep. Around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. Jenny answered it and was met with a strange voice asking for someone who did not live at the house. She noted that the voice was female and unfamiliar. After hanging up, she noticed that the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked, unusual at that hour. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and went back to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny was jolted awake by a loud bang on the roof, followed by a rolling noise. Then, about 30 minutes later, she awoke again to the smell of smoke. Flames were coming from George's office downstairs, and within moments, the house was engulfed. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to escape. George tried desperately to get back into the house to rescue the 5 missing children, but everything seemed to conspire against him. The ladder he always kept propped against the house was missing. Both of his trucks, which he intended to drive to the 2nd floor and climb mysteriously, wouldn't start despite working fine earlier that day. Attempts to call the fire department failed. No operator responded. By the time help arrived hours later, the home had burned to the ground. Initially, the authorities concluded that the children had perished in the blaze, but Jenny wasn't convinced. No bones were found in the ashes, which contradicted her later experiments with animal bones and accounts from professionals stating that remains should have survived even a 2-hour fire. Over time, the Sodders began to suspect foul play, and evidence began to support their suspicions. Witnesses claimed to have seen the missing children alive after the fire. A woman reported seeing them peering from a passing car as the fire raged. A waitress claimed she served them breakfast the following morning at a diner 50 miles away. Another woman said she saw the children being held in a strange room behind a fence. There were other troubling signs. George Sodder, a proud Italian immigrant, had a controversial past. He was outspoken in his criticism of Mussolini, and rumors suggested that this had drawn the ire of local Italian-American groups, including possibly the Mafia. A few months before the fire, a life insurance salesman, angered when George declined his offer, had warned that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed as a punishment for his political views. Even more chilling was the discovery of a green object, potentially the cause of the initial bang on the roof, believed to be a pineapple bomb used in warfare. George found a piece of it buried in the yard. This led some to theorize that the fire was deliberately started to cover up a kidnapping. In the following years, the Sodders dedicated their lives to solving the mystery. They hired private investigators, sent letters across the globe, and erected a massive billboard along Route 16 with the children's faces, and a $5,000 reward, later increased to $10,000. The sign remained up for decades, becoming an eerie local landmark and a symbol of undying parental hope. In 1967, a photo arrived in the mail addressed to Jenny. It contained the image of a young man in his 20s resembling Louis Sodder. On the back was scrawled, "Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Elil boys. A90132 or 35. Despite hiring more detectives to trace the origin of the photo, they never uncovered who sent it or whether it was genuine. Over time, George and Jenny passed away, never knowing what truly happened to their 5 children. Their surviving children continued the search for answers, and many locals still speak of the mystery with a mix of sorrow and curiosity. To this day, no conclusive evidence has emerged. No bodies, no confirmed sightings, No suspects. The case remains open in public memory, if not in official records. The story of the Sodder children is not just a mystery. It's a tragedy etched into the collective consciousness of a town and a nation. It's a testament to a family's unrelenting hope and a chilling reminder that even in our own homes the unthinkable can happen and remain unexplained for generations. The Black-Eyed Children. Encounters. In the shadowy corridors of modern folklore, few tales are as eerily consistent or as chilling as those involving black-eyed children. These strange figures, typically appearing as children aged 6 to 16, have been reported around the world since at least the 1980s, though some researchers believe their origins may stretch further back. Their signature feature: pitch-black eyes, no whites, no irises, just deep, endless voids where human empathy should be. But it's not just their eyes that disturb witnesses. It's everything else: their monotone voices, their unusual behavior, and the deep sense of dread they inspire, often for no clear reason. The earliest widely known report came from a journalist named Brian Bethel in 1996. While sitting in his car in Abilene, Texas, Bethel was approached by two boys who looked to be around 10 or 12 years old. They knocked on his window and asked for a ride to the movie theater. They said they forgot their money and needed to go home to get it. At first, Bethel considered helping them, but soon he felt an unexplainable terror rise in his chest. Something was wrong. As he hesitated, the children became more insistent, their speech unusually articulate and emotionless. That's when he noticed their eyes were completely black. Bethel sped away. Later, when he recounted the incident online, dozens of people came forward with similar stories. What was most alarming wasn't just the frequency, it was the consistency across accounts, even from people on different continents. Typically, encounters with black-eyed children follow a disturbing pattern. The children appear at night, often on doorsteps, porches, or near parked cars. They speak politely, asking to come inside to use the phone to get a ride, to wait for their parents. They insist they cannot enter unless invited. Witnesses almost always report a paralyzing fear or nausea, even before seeing their eyes. Once refused, the children may become hostile or simply vanish without a trace. Some who have let them in, though rare, report electronic malfunctions, sudden illness, or even years of bad luck. In a few stories, witnesses claim that after allowing a black-eyed child into their home, one or more family members developed cancer or died unexpectedly. While no evidence conclusively links these events, the emotional weight of the stories is undeniable. What makes these entities so deeply disturbing is that they mimic innocence. A child knocking at your door asking for help, this triggers an instinctive urge to protect. But black-eyed children seem to weaponize that instinct, drawing you into something unknown. Paranormal researchers have debated their origins for decades. Some theories suggest they are demons or spirits using childlike forms to deceive. Extraterrestrials, hybrid beings sent to study or infiltrate humanity. Vampiric entities bound by old folkloric rules like needing permission to enter. Tulpas, or thought forms manifested by collective belief and fear. There's also the unsettling possibility that they are none of the above, that they represent something we do not yet understand, a new kind of entity that defies classification. Some skeptics believe the stories are urban legend perpetuated by creepypasta forums and internet subcultures. But that doesn't explain the pre-internet reports or the strange physical symptoms described by multiple unconnected witnesses. In one case, a woman in Vermont claimed she let two black-eyed children into her home during a snowstorm. Her cats hid the entire time, and her husband soon developed aggressive skin cancer. Later, the power in their house would flicker every night at 3 a.m., and she began having nightmares of eyes watching her from the corners of the ceiling. Even law enforcement officers have anonymously shared sightings. One off-duty cop in rural Oregon reportedly encountered a black-eyed teenager standing alone at the edge of a forest road. The boy did not speak, but stared silently for minutes. When the officer looked down to radio dispatch, the boy vanished without a sound, leaving only 2 footprints in the frost-covered grass. The most consistent trait in these encounters is the sense of primal fear they invoke. Rational adults, veterans, scientists' mothers all report the same overwhelming feeling that something is deeply wrong, that these children are not children at all. There's something ancient and predatory about them, cloaked in the skin of the familiar. One might dismiss them as hallucinations or shared delusions. But when strangers, thousands of miles apart, describe the same phenomenon down to the way the children knock the flatness of their tone, the eerily formal speech, and the soulless eyes, it becomes harder to ignore. Black-eyed children may never be proven real in a scientific sense, but to those who have seen them, those who've refused to open the door and felt a chill ripple through their souls, the truth is already clear. Whatever they are, they're waiting outside, politely asking to be let in. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, 1959. In the frigid depths of the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia, a tragedy unfolded in February 1959 that has baffled investigators, scientists and conspiracy theorists for over 6 decades. Known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident, this case involved the mysterious and brutal deaths of 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Their bodies were found under bizarre and disturbing conditions, raising countless questions, most of which remain unanswered to this day. Led by Igor Dyatlov, a seasoned mountaineer and engineering student, the group set out on what was intended to be a challenging but achievable trek across the snowbound region of Sverdlovsk Oblast. The goal was to reach the peak of Otorten, a remote mountain whose name ominously translates to "don't go there" in the indigenous Mansi language. Despite being well prepared, the expedition would never return alive. After missing a scheduled communication, a search party was dispatched. What they found stunned even the most hardened Soviet officials. The hiker's tent was discovered on the slope of a mountain, now known as Dyatlov Pass, partially buried under snow, but not collapsed. Even more strangely, it had been slashed open from the inside, as if the hikers had fled in a panic. Most of their clothing and supplies were still inside. Footprints, some barefoot, led away from the tent into the freezing darkness. Over the next few weeks, searchers discovered the bodies of the hikers in various states and locations. 2 were found under a cedar tree nearly a mile away in their underwear, huddled around the remains of a small fire. 3 more were scattered between the tree and the tent, appearing to have died while attempting to return. Their poses suggested a desperate and confused escape, as if they were blind or disoriented. But it was the last 4 bodies found months later in a ravine that shocked the world. These individuals had suffered massive internal trauma, broken ribs, fractured skulls, with force comparable to a car crash. Yet there were no external wounds, and no sign of struggle or avalanche. One woman, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her face. Her body also showed traces of high radiation. Another hiker had a deformed neck, and perhaps most unsettling, some of the corpses had orange-tinted skin and gray hair, as though they had aged prematurely or been exposed to a strange substance. The Soviet investigation was swift and secretive. Authorities officially closed the case, citing a vague cause, an unknown compelling force. But they also quickly restricted access to the region for years, adding to the mystery and feeding conspiracy theories. Speculation has ranged widely. Avalanche experts argue the damage doesn't match known avalanche injuries, and the area showed no such signs. Infrasound-induced panic. Some theorists claim wind patterns in the mountains may have caused a low-frequency sound capable of inducing irrational fear, triggering a mass panic. But this remains speculative and cannot explain the injuries. Military testing. A common theory suggests the group accidentally encountered secret Soviet weapons tests, perhaps parachute mines or radiological experiments leading to radiation exposure, internal trauma, and a government cover-up. Yeti or cryptid attack. Though sensationalized, some have pointed to the brutality of the injuries and strange photographs taken by the hikers that show unknown figures in the snow. Alien encounter. Glowing orbs were reported in the sky that night by other mountaineers. Some suggest the hikers were victims of extraterrestrial interaction, especially given the radiation and unexplained behavior. KGB infiltration. A darker theory posits that one or more hikers were involved in espionage, and the group was eliminated due to a botched operation. This aligns with the secrecy of the investigation, but lacks solid evidence. Adding to the mystery is a photograph from one of the hikers' cameras, often referred to as Frame 33, a blurry, shadowy image that some believe shows a humanoid figure stalking the camp. Others dismiss it as a misfire or accidental exposure. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case and in 2020 concluded that an unusual type of avalanche likely caused the deaths. However, this explanation has not satisfied critics or researchers, many of whom argue that the physical evidence simply does not align with an avalanche scenario. What makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so disturbing is not just the violence of it, it's the lack of logical explanation. These were not amateurs. They were skilled hikers in good health and equipped for harsh conditions. Whatever happened to them induced a level of fear and confusion that caused them to run into the Siberian wilderness, half-dressed only to die in agony and mystery. To this day, the Dyatlov Pass remains a haunted, snow-swept place of speculation. Memorials mark the site and yearly pilgrimages are made by hikers seeking answers. But the silence of the mountains offers none. Were these young adventurers victims of natural disaster, human malice, or something far stranger? The truth buried under layers of snow time and secrecy may never be fully unearthed. The Lead Masks Case, 1966. Among the many strange and unsolved deaths of the 20th century, few match the surreal and disturbing details of the Lead Masks. Case a real-life mystery that sounds more like a scene from a science fiction horror film than a police report. On August 20th, 1966, in the hills of Niterói, Brazil, the bodies of two Brazilian men were found lying side by side, dead, dressed in formal suits, wearing lead masks and surrounded by cryptic clues that baffled investigators and still provoke intense debate. The victims were Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, two electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes. a town about 200 kilometers from where their bodies were discovered. According to witnesses, the two men had told family members they were going to São Paulo to purchase work-related supplies. However, they never returned. Days later, their corpses were discovered on a remote slope known as Morro do Vintém, but it wasn't the mere fact that they were dead that caused alarm. It was the bizarre scene around them. Both men were dressed immaculately in matching suits and raincoats, lying peacefully side by side as if asleep. They were wearing homemade lead masks, the kind designed to protect against radiation, covering only the eyes. Nearby were an empty water bottle, 2 wet towels, and a notebook containing a chilling cryptic note written in Portuguese. 16:30, be at the agreed place. 18:30, ingest capsules after effect protect metals, wait for mask signal. There were no signs of violence, no external injuries, no evidence of a struggle. Their belongings were untouched. There were no witnesses to their deaths, and most notably, there were no toxicology reports because the bodies were too decomposed by the time an autopsy was conducted. A major failure on the part of authorities that sealed the mystery in fog. What were the capsules? Why the lead masks? What signal were they waiting for? The official investigation went cold, but theories began to spiral from grounded explanations to the far reaches of metaphysics and the paranormal. Suicide by cultic ritual. One prevailing theory suggests the men were members of a secretive spiritualist or pseudo-scientific cult experimenting with communication beyond the physical realm, possibly involving psychedelics or occult technology. Some believe they were attempting to contact extraterrestrials, the dead or divine entities, and had prepared to shield themselves from harmful rays during the encounter by wearing lead masks. Witness accounts later supported the idea that the two men had been studying books on telepathy, spiritual alchemy, and spiritualist science, particularly ones related to intense light phenomena, which might explain their precautions. A shopkeeper recalled that they had purchased waterproof coats and materials for making the masks a few days prior to their disappearance. If this was a ritual, it might have required them to ingest hallucinogenic or psychoactive substances, hence the capsules mentioned in the note. Perhaps they expected a euphoric vision or even physical ascension, and the masks were to protect their eyes from the brilliance of divine presence or an alien craft. A drug experiment gone wrong. Another explanation is more terrestrial, that Cruz and Viana were simply experimenting with powerful drugs. Under the influence of untested substances, they may have imagined they were in contact with higher beings or misunderstood the dangers of what they were ingesting. Their formal attire masks and the cryptic instructions may have been part of a ritualistic fantasy born from altered states of consciousness. However, there were no drugs found at the scene, and toxicology was inconclusive due to decomposition. The involvement of substances remains speculation, but a possibility that fits the surreal nature of their final moments. Radiation, protection, and science. Experiment. Some suggest that the lead masks were genuine protective gear, and that the two men were involved in a clandestine scientific experiment, possibly involving radiation or electromagnetic waves. As technicians, they may have attempted to build or operate a device, believing it required specific timings, substances, and shielding. But again, no equipment was found nearby. No evidence of technological testing. And why choose an isolated hilltop for such a trial? The mystery only deepens. Murder and deception. Another theory proposes the possibility of foul play. Someone may have lured them to the hill under false pretenses, perhaps offering access to mystical knowledge, UFO contact, or money, and then orchestrated their deaths. The cryptic note could have been planted, or the men themselves coerced into taking something lethal, believing it would grant them access to the divine or alien. But if it was murder, it was an extraordinarily subtle and clean one, leaving no trace of struggle or trauma. The symbolism of the lead masks. Lead has long been associated with alchemical symbolism, transformation secrecy, and resistance to corruption. In folklore and mysticism, lead masks could symbolize protection from spiritual forces, or even an attempt to shield the soul during passage into other dimensions. In this context, the masks become more than physical objects. They are metaphysical tools meant to guide or protect the wearer during a crossing of realms. Whether through hallucination, spiritual journey, or death itself, Cruz and Viana may have believed they were going somewhere beyond the physical. To this day, no definitive cause of death has been determined. No one knows what the capsules were. The masks' crude hand-cut sheets of lead remain in police custody. The case has become a staple of paranormal literature, a tragic tale of curiosity turned fatal, and a chilling reminder of the thin veil between belief and mystery. The lead masks case remains open in the minds of those who dare to imagine what did these men believe they were going to witness at 6:30 p.m. on that remote hill. And what signal were they waiting for? That never came, certainly. Here is the continuation. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich, 1978. Few aviation disappearances evoke as much eerie fascination as that of Frederick Valentich, a young Australian pilot whose vanishing act in 1978 is laced with chilling radio transmissions, strange lights in the sky, and a possible encounter with something not of this world. It remains one of the most baffling and hotly debated unsolved aerial mysteries of the 20th century. On the evening of October 20, 1978, 20-year-old Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport in Victoria, Australia, flying a rented Cessna 182L light aircraft. His plan was to fly across the Bass Strait to King Island, a journey that should have taken just over an hour. The weather was calm. The skies were mostly clear. Valentich was an amateur pilot with about 150 hours of flight experience, not a veteran but competent enough for this kind of trip. However, he never arrived. A chilling final transmission. At 7:06 p.m., about 45 minutes into his flight, Valentich radioed Melbourne Flight Service. His voice was calm but tense. He reported seeing an unidentified aircraft circling above him at high speed. He couldn't confirm its type or size, only that it was large metallic and seemed to have 4 bright lights, green in color. As the transmission continued, Valentich sounded increasingly disturbed. He said the object was orbiting his plane and appeared to be playing a cat-and-mouse game, darting above and around him. At one point, he claimed his engine was rough idling and that he was not able to identify the aircraft, even though he tried. Then, at 7:12 p.m., just before all communication ceased, Valentich's final words crackled through the radio waves. "It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." The line went dead. Following that, flight control recorded 17 seconds of bizarre metallic scraping sounds, unintelligible like mechanical interference or distortion. The transmission was cut off, and Frederick Valentich was never heard from again. No crash site was found. No debris. No oil slick. Nothing. It was as if the plane and its pilot had vanished into thin air. Search and theories. An extensive air and sea search began immediately and continued for over a week, covering vast areas of the Bass Strait. Despite involving both military and civilian aircraft, no trace of Valentich or his Cessna was found. Several theories were quickly put forward. Disorientation and crash. The most conventional explanation is that Valentich became disoriented, possibly experiencing spatial disorientation during twilight hours, and crashed into the sea. The lights he saw might have been reflections or stars. However, this doesn't explain the metallic noises, the hovering object, or his calm, detailed descriptions of a machine flying in ways he couldn't explain. Suicide. Hoax. Another theory speculates that Valentich orchestrated his own disappearance, perhaps, by intentionally crashing or landing elsewhere. But why fake a UFO encounter? His family and friends deny any suicidal intent. There was no life insurance claim and no motive was uncovered. Also, his plane was never found odd for a staged vanishing. Alien abduction. The most controversial yet persistent theory is that Frederick Valentich had a close encounter, possibly a UFO abduction, the strange lights, erratic aerial maneuvers, and his own words. "It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft," all point to something inexplicable. Even more disturbing are multiple independent eyewitness reports from that same evening. Several people around the Bass Strait claim they saw a strange green light in the sky at the exact time Valentich disappeared. Some said they witnessed an aircraft being followed by a fast-moving green object. Others saw no aircraft, only the glowing object itself. In 2014, a retired engineer revealed that on the night of Valentich's disappearance, he was photographing the night sky near Cape Otway, directly along Valentich's flight path, and accidentally captured a strange diamond-shaped object emitting green light. The photo remained in obscurity until analyzed decades later. It adds weight to the idea that Valentich saw something real and terrifying. Frederick's obsession with UFOs. One detail often cited is that Valentich had an intense interest in UFOs. He had read about abduction cases, watched science fiction films, and believed in extraterrestrial life. In the weeks before his flight, he told his father that he was worried about UFO activity over Bass Strait. Some skeptics suggest his mind may have conjured a UFO scenario interpreting normal flight anomalies as alien contact. But that theory requires us to believe that a pilot could hallucinate an entire encounter while calmly describing it in real time using precise flight terminology without any signs of panic or confusion. Psychological and paranormal possibilities. What if it wasn't aliens or hallucination, but something in between? The Bass Strait has a long and eerie history of strange disappearances of ships, planes, and people. Some have called it Australia's Bermuda Triangle. Reports of time slips, magnetic interference, and invisible forces stretch back over a century. Could Frederick Valentich have stumbled into a paranormal phenomenon, a tear in the veil of reality, an energy anomaly that somehow consumed his plane? The answer remains elusive. What we do know is that Valentich was never seen again. His aircraft was never recovered, and his final transmission stands as one of the most haunting pieces of aviation history on record. To this day, pilots, UFO researchers, and skeptics still debate what really happened that night. But one thing is certain: Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport with a dream of flying and vanished into an unsolvable riddle that continues to cast its long shadow across the skies of Australia. The Pollock twins and reincarnation evidence. Among the most compelling and controversial cases often cited as potential evidence for reincarnation is the story of the Pollock twins, a tale involving the tragic death of two children followed by the birth of twins who seemed to carry memories, behaviors, and even physical marks that mirrored their deceased sister. This case has been studied extensively by psychologists, parapsychologists, and reincarnation researchers alike, and remains a profound mystery in the intersection of life, death, and consciousness. The tragedy in Hexham, England. The story begins in Hexham, a small town in Northumberland, England, in the year 1957. John and Florence Pollock were a devout Catholic couple raising their daughters, Joanna, 11 years old, and Jacqueline, 6 years old. The family lived a quiet, ordinary life until tragedy struck on May 7th, 1957. On that day, Joanna and Jacqueline were walking to church with a friend when a distraught woman who had lost custody of her children deliberately ran them over with her car. All three girls died instantly. The entire town was shaken by the loss, but none more so than the Pollocks. Florence fell into deep depression, and John became obsessed with the idea that his daughters would somehow return to them. Despite Florence's grief and skepticism, John clung to a powerful intuition that his daughters would be reborn into their family. He prayed intensely and maintained a deep belief in reincarnation, something his Catholic faith officially rejected. And in 1958, something extraordinary happened. The birth of the twins. A little over a year after the tragedy, Florence became pregnant again. On October 4th, 1958, she gave birth to twin girls, an event rare enough on its own, but even more so since no history of twins existed in either side of the family. The twins were named Jennifer and Gillian. From the start, John believed they were the reincarnations of Jacqueline and Joanna. Florence, at first resistant to this idea, began to question her own skepticism as strange and unexplainable phenomena emerged. Uncanny similarities. Jennifer and Gillian, though genetically identical, displayed remarkably different birthmarks. Jennifer had a distinctive mark on her waist that matched Jacqueline's scar from a bicycle accident. She also had a birthmark on her forehead mirroring Jacqueline's small birthmark in the same spot. As the twins grew older, more similarities surfaced, many of them astonishing recognition of places they had never visited. When the family returned to Hexham, they had moved away after the accident. The twins began to recognize landmarks with incredible accuracy. They pointed out their former school-favorite park and even the cemetery where Joanna and Jacqueline were buried without ever having been told of its location. Playing games from past lives. The twins would often role-play car accidents with distressing accuracy. They would say things like, "The blood is coming out of your eyes," or "I can't breathe." These were not phrases taught or encouraged by their parents, who remained silent about the past tragedy during their early years. Possessions and preferences. When presented with old toys belonging to Joanna and Jacqueline, the twins were able to identify each sister's belongings correctly. Jennifer preferred Jacqueline's toys, Gillian Joanna's. They also had similar food preferences, mannerisms, and emotional temperaments to their deceased sisters. Phobias and trauma. Responses. The twins were terrified of cars. When one passed by too quickly, they would cling to each other and cry. Once a car engine started nearby and both girls screamed in unison, "The car is coming to get us." These behaviors and memories began to fade around the age of 5, which aligns with many cases in reincarnation research where such memories diminish as the child matures. Dr. Ian Stevenson's investigation. The Pollock case gained international attention when it was studied by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who spent decades investigating reincarnation claims in children. Stevenson was meticulous, cautious, and skeptical of fraudulent or unverified cases. After years of study, Stevenson concluded that the Pollock twins represented one of the strongest cases supporting reincarnation ever documented. In his writings, he noted that the children's behaviors, knowledge, and emotional patterns were too specific and too independent of parental influence to be dismissed as coincidence or conditioning. Stevenson included the case in his seminal book, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, and argued that while no single case proves reincarnation, the weight of consistent evidence across many similar stories points to a phenomenon that merits serious scientific attention. Skepticism and counter-arguments. Naturally, the case has its skeptics. Some argue that John Pollock's strong belief in reincarnation may have influenced how he interpreted the twins' behaviors. Perhaps the girls picked up on subtle cues or were unconsciously coached through family stories or emotional expressions. Others suggest that children are highly imaginative, and the connections to their deceased sisters could be coincidences or misremembered anecdotes. The human mind is remarkably good at seeing patterns even where none may exist. Yet even skeptical psychologists admit that certain elements like the accurate recognition of places and people or the birthmarks aligning with past injuries are difficult to explain through conventional psychological models alone. Legacy of the Pollock twins. Jennifer and Gillian Pollock eventually grew up, lost their childhood memories of the previous lives, and lived ordinary adult lives. In later interviews, Gillian mentioned having occasional flashbacks or dreams that felt strangely disconnected from her known experiences. Today, the Pollock twin story continues to spark debate. For believers in reincarnation, it is among the most compelling modern cases of soul continuity after death. For skeptics, it is a powerful example of how grief, belief, and psychology can intersect in mysterious and haunting ways. What makes the story so powerful is not only the bizarre similarities, but the deep emotional undercurrent of loss, hope, and healing. For a grieving family, the birth of the twins brought a sense of restoration even if the scientific world remains divided. In a universe still brimming with mysteries, the Pollock twins stand as a quiet but unforgettable echo of a life or lives, not entirely lost, but perhaps continued through unseen threads of spirit and memory. Resurrection, Mary the Ghost, Hitchhiker of Chicago. Few American ghost stories are as enduring or as eerie as the tale of resurrection, Mary the Phantom Hitchhiker, who has haunted the southwest suburbs of Chicago for nearly a century. With dozens of eyewitness reports, police involvement, and deep ties to real locations and historical events, her legend transcends urban folklore and steps into the realm of paranormal history. At the heart of the story lies a single question. Who was Mary, and why does she still walk Archer Avenue, always vanishing near the gates of Resurrection Cemetery, the classic hitchhiker encounter? The legend typically follows a familiar pattern. A man driving alone down Archer Avenue, often late at night, often near the Willowbrook Ballroom, sees a young woman dressed in a white dress walking along the roadside. She appears real attractive, quiet, perhaps a little cold to the touch. He offers her a ride. She accepts. She speaks little, maybe gives a name, Mary, and often asks to be dropped off near Resurrection Cemetery. Sometimes she disappears before they reach it. Other times she asks the driver to stop steps out and walks through the iron gates, vanishing before his eyes. The man is left shocked, often questioning his sanity. Days later, when he returns to the address she gave or tries to learn more about the girl he's told by residents, that sounds like Mary. But she died years ago. This is not a tale told once and forgotten. The story has been repeated by dozens of independent witnesses since the 1930s, each adding their own eerie consistency to the legend. A real tragedy behind the ghost. Most folklorists and paranormal researchers believe that Resurrection Mary is based on a real person, possibly Mary Bregovi, a young woman who's died in a car crash in 1934. Others suggest Anna Norkus, a 12-year-old who died in 1927 after a dance, fits the description. Both girls were buried at Resurrection Cemetery. Both were known to enjoy dancing at the Willowbrook Ballroom, a popular dance hall in the early 20th century. And both were tragically taken in the prime of life. Whether or not Mary was one of these young women, the consistency of details across time is chilling. A white dress, blonde or light hair, love of dancing, fatal car accident, haunting of Archer Avenue and the cemetery gates, physical evidence. The burned gate. Perhaps the most tangible and shocking piece of alleged paranormal evidence came in August 1976, when a driver claimed he saw a woman pressed against the bars of the Resurrection Cemetery gate. When police arrived, they found something terrifying. Two of the iron bars were scorched and bent apart, with what appeared to be finger imprints melted into the metal. The cemetery denied any supernatural cause, claiming it was likely due to vandalism or heat stress. But many locals saw it differently. To them, it was the ultimate proof that Mary was real, not a hallucination, not a metaphor, but a spirit with the power to leave a mark on the physical world. The cemetery eventually removed and replaced the gate section, but photographs still exist, and the incident remains one of the most discussed parts of the legend. Eyewitness accounts across decades. The list of alleged sightings is extensive and disturbingly consistent. 1939, Jerry Pallas, a young man, met a girl named Mary at a dance hall. They danced, laughed, and he drove her home, only to find she had vanished from the car near Resurrection Cemetery. He later identified her from a photograph of a girl who had been dead for years. 1973. A cab driver reported a girl in a white dress getting into his cab near a dance hall. She asked to be dropped off at Resurrection Cemetery and disappeared before payment. 1980s and 1990s multiple. Drivers, often truckers, filed police reports about picking up a mysterious girl on Archer Avenue who vanished en route. Some described their confusion and fear. A few even underwent psychological evaluation. 2000s to present, though less frequent sightings still occur. Paranormal enthusiasts even organize Mary Watches parking along Archer Avenue with cameras and recorders. Some claim success. Others drive home more unsettled than when they arrived. These accounts span not just years, but generations. People of different backgrounds, beliefs, and ages have all described almost identical experiences, a rare consistency in ghost lore. Skepticism and rational explanations. Of course, skeptics abound. Some say Resurrection Mary is nothing more than a Chicago folk legend, a product of brief coincidence and imagination. After all, Archer Avenue is long dark and poorly lit. The power of suggestion is strong, and countless ghost stories involve phantom hitchhikers. Psychologists point to pareidolia, confirmation bias, and the cultural script of a girl in white ghost as factors that perpetuate the myth. People may see what they expect or what they fear. Others suggest that pranksters, mistaken identities, or intoxicated drivers account for the sightings. Still, no concrete evidence has ever fully debunked the legend. In fact, the level of detail and emotional intensity of the stories often transcends simple misperception. Symbolism and cultural impact. Whether real or myth. Resurrection. Mary has become an iconic figure in American folklore, especially in Chicago. She represents the universal themes of tragic youth cut short, restless spirits, the search for peace after death, the thin veil between life and the afterlife. Local businesses have incorporated her into their branding. Books, documentaries, and even songs have been written about her. She has inspired fictional characters, appeared in ghost tours, and is frequently ranked among the top 10 ghost stories in the U.S. But despite the fame, her story retains a deeply melancholic tone. If the spirit is real, she isn't malevolent. She seems sad, confused, or perhaps simply trying to go home. There's no record of her harming anyone, just a presence felt seen and then gone. The mystery remains. To this day, Resurrection. Mary walks a delicate line between myth and mystery. Her story is well documented, thoroughly investigated, and emotionally resonant. And like many of the world's most enduring ghost stories, the mystery may never be solved, nor should it be. For those who believe her ghost is a reminder that some tragedies leave an echo so strong it refuses to fade. For others, she is a fascinating case of mass folklore, an example of how human memory, fear, and longing can create legends that feel more real than reality itself. But if you ever find yourself driving down Archer Avenue late at night and you see a young woman in white on the roadside, just remember, some passengers might not make it to their destination in the same way you do. The Monte Cristo Homestead, Australia's most haunted house. Sitting atop a hill in Junee, New South Wales, the Monte Cristo Homestead is not just one of the most well-preserved colonial mansions in Australia. It is also considered Australia's most haunted house. With its Gothic architecture, brooding presence, and a history riddled with death, tragedy, and reported hauntings, the estate has fascinated ghost hunters, skeptics, and spiritual seekers for decades. More than just a creepy old house, Monte Cristo stands as a symbol of lingering grief, cruelty, and trauma, its walls seemingly absorbing the emotional residue of all who lived, suffered, or died within. The origins, a family dream. Turned dark Monte Cristo, which translates from Latin as Mount of Christ, was built in 1885 by Christopher William Crawley, a wealthy landowner who amassed his fortune when the railway was built through Junee. The Crawley family was seen as powerful, affluent, and respected, yet their story and that of the house they built is anything but peaceful. Crawley and his wife Elizabeth had 7 children and were known for their devout Catholicism. Elizabeth in particular was seen as austere, deeply religious, and even cruel. Following her husband's death in 1910, she became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving the house, and reportedly spending hours in prayer, dressed in black mourning clothes for the rest of her life. After her own death in 1933, her presence, according to many, never truly left the house. From the very beginning, the home was plagued by dark energy. Multiple deaths occurred on the premises, from tragic accidents to outright neglect, creating the backbone of the haunting narratives that endure today. A house soaked in suffering. There is an unusually high volume of documented and anecdotal deaths associated with Monte Cristo, and each one contributes to its grim legend. A stable boy was burned alive in a barn behind the house, either by accident or intent. A housekeeper fell to her death from the balcony under mysterious circumstances. A young maid is said to have become pregnant by Mr. Crawley and threw herself down the stairs or was pushed. A mentally disabled man named Harold, reportedly kept chained in the caretaker's cottage for decades, was found after his mother died. When discovered, he was in a near-feral state and died shortly after in an asylum. A caretaker was murdered on the property in 1961, shot by a teenage boy who claimed voices told him to do it. The house is also surrounded by multiple unmarked graves, and some locals have long whispered that abuse, secrecy, and suffering were central to life inside Monte Cristo's walls. Paranormal activity and witness accounts. Over the years, countless visitors, paranormal investigators, and even skeptics have reported strange and often disturbing phenomena inside the Monte Cristo homestead. These range from mild discomfort to intense physical interactions. Among the most common reports, sudden temperature drops in certain rooms, especially Elizabeth Crawley's former bedroom. Disembodied voices, including weeping footsteps and whispering. Apparitions, a woman in black, a man with a top hat, and ghostly children have all been seen throughout the home. Phantom lights turning on or off, or appearing in windows at night. Electronic interference, including cameras malfunctioning and batteries instantly draining. Visitors who report being touched, scratched, or pushed particularly near the staircase where the maid supposedly died. One of the most famous stories is that of a guest who fainted near the stairs and awoke with inexplicable bruises. Others describe a crushing sadness or rage that overwhelms them in certain rooms. Even pets have reportedly refused to enter the house, or, in some cases, reacted violently while inside. A haunted legacy passed on. In 1963, the homestead was purchased by the Ryan family, who turned it into a museum and opened it for ghost tours. The Ryans themselves claim to have experienced years of unexplained events, including phantom footsteps, objects moving, and even being locked out of rooms by unseen forces. Rather than hiding the hauntings, the Ryans embraced them, offering ghost tours, overnight stays, and public investigations. Monte Cristo has since become Australia's paranormal epicenter, featured on international TV shows, documentaries, and books. While some accuse the hauntings of being exaggerated for tourism, the volume and consistency of reported experiences make the story difficult to dismiss. Symbolism, trauma, and spiritual residue. Beyond its thrills and chills, Monte Cristo taps into something deeper, a legacy of spiritual unrest tied to generational pain. The Crawley family's combination of wealth, isolation, and religious rigidity creates a symbolic backdrop for suppressed emotions, unspoken abuse, and the weight of untold secrets. The concept of a building absorbing trauma is not new. Many traditions suggest that intense emotions, especially fear, pain, grief, or rage, can imprint themselves on physical spaces. Monte Cristo, with its history of death, mental illness, and tragedy, seems to radiate that very energy. From a psychological perspective, the mansion becomes a metaphor for what happens when the suffering of others is ignored, when power is unchecked, and when silence becomes the language of a household. The unfinished story. Despite being one of the most investigated haunted locations in the Southern Hemisphere, Monte Cristo remains an unsolved mystery. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the cumulative evidence, historical, anecdotal, and emotional, makes the house feel like more than just bricks and mortar. It feels alive, watchful, waiting. Every creaking floorboard, every sudden draft, every flickering light adds another chapter to the story. And those who visit often leave changed, haunted not just by what they saw, but by what they felt. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Monte Cristo doesn't just house ghosts, it awakens the ghosts within us.